The underlying dynamic that we're seeing is this dynamic of factions that are extraordinarily motivated, right? So the pensions are very important to the public employee unions. Mm-hmm. And an additional $100 tax assessed to my property in Marin County or wherever I happen to live, Stockton, it's not catastrophic to me at this stage, right? So while I may grumble and I may be upset about it, I'm not going to stand in the way, right? Or at least that's what we're seeing in terms of the voting behavior of homeowners in the state of California. If we take the money away, if we refuse to vote for these issues, what happens then?
You know, things are going to not get built. And look, I'm not a political activist. I just said what I do, but it neither way works, right? If you give them the money, you just get more of the same. If you don't give them the money, you get more of the same. So it's not as if you know, I think at the local level, if voters reject a school bond, I remember one measure, this was back in Ohio, there is no plan B. You have to vote for this, or there is no plan B, the world's going to end. And the voters rejected it, and the next day they came out with plan B. So I'm all for trying to force them to come to plan B, but I'm not a political activist. I have no illusions that voting one way or the other, voting for one candidate or voting for one measure or not, is going to do anything. I think the outside economic pressure is what is ultimately going to force people in the legislature or the local cities to do anything. But the cities are in the real pickle. The state budget, only a small portion actually goes to pensions. At the local budget, a large portion goes, and a huge portion goes to public employee compensation, and those numbers are going up. So, you know, to the local voter, I say, yeah, I mean, you're going to be funding, you know, you're going to continue to help the city kick the can down the road, but you know, they're looking at closing parks and reducing every sort of budget. I mean, that whole crowd out phenomenon is real, and it's just a mess, and it comes from the political power of unions, and people tend to go along to get along, right? If you're running for office and you're going to try to do something about pensions, you know, I could introduce you to a number of candidates who've tried, and most of them are not in.
Are no longer.
They're not in. They're no longer. They're ex-candidates.
Yeah. So when you think about the underlying dynamics of the players at this game, right? I was having a conversation with Michael Janest, who we both know, about some of this dynamic. And part of the challenge, as I see it, is that nobody in the process is intending to be, at least almost nobody in the process is intending to be a bad actor, right? The union representatives represent their members. The politicians represent their constituents, understanding that the performance in their job requires first and foremost that the teachers don't go on strike, that the police show up, that you avoid the disruption that's occurring. The police and the teachers are rightly looking at themselves and their community, and with the exception of those who are benefiting from extraordinary largesse, probably look at their surrounding community and say, I'm middle class, right? This is California. You know, $300,000 is a lot of money almost everywhere in the world, but if you happen to live in Orange County, $300,000 is very nice, but you're certainly not driving around in a Lamborghini, or at least you're probably not.
Okay, a nice Mercedes, maybe.
A nice, yes, right, on lease. But nobody is explicitly trying to be a bad actor in this process.
I don't argue that people are bad people. Yeah. They're just, the system is designed in a way where those with a great deal of political power get their way. That's the way politics is. It's just an imbalance in the power dynamic. Yep. So you shouldn't be able to spend more than you can afford. Of course, we look at the federal government. What do we have? $1 trillion annual deficits now and a $23 trillion debt. So I don't know. Maybe locals are looking at the feds for their inspiration. It's not about ill intent. I don't argue anything in my book about ill intent. It's just about the system as it's working right now. And
so how would you change the system? If
well,
I give you the magic wand.
Oh, it's real simple. On pensions, it's real simple. You know, there are a few, you could sit down with some actuaries, some of whom you've interviewed, and talk about what you do. And you could move to well, first thing I would do, simplest thing, California rule. That's the rule that you cannot reduce pensions going forward, even going forward, right? Unless you give the employees an equal or greater benefit. So when I worked at one company, and I actually had a very small defined benefit plan. And a defined benefit is the plan you're guaranteed a rate of return based on a formula. A defined contribution is the employer gives a specific contribution, and then however the stock market works, like 401k. So the California rule has made it impossible for local and state governments to reduce benefits going forward. So need to overturn the California rule. The legislature could do that. The courts, the California Supreme Court just punted on a case, a Marin County case, and basically avoided dealing with the key issue, even though the Brown administration had written a very compelling brief arguing that they ought to take a look at the California rule. It was dealing with something called airtime. I mean, it's just a specific benefit, but they dealt with the airtime issue where you buy extra credits and reject it, and they allowed the state to remove that benefit, but they didn't deal with the California rule. So the legislature could go and change the California rule if it wanted to, which would just mean, like when I worked at this private company, starting tomorrow, I receive a lesser pension benefit. I'm not having anything taken away from me. I'm made whole through the end of today, but starting tomorrow, you'll get a lesser benefit. So that in itself would get the cities off the hook. I think public employees ought to have the same type of pension that others have, which is mostly 401k. I think it's impossible to have a defined benefit plan that doesn't get manipulated in the political process, because we're guessing about rates of return. And the formulas are just naturally, it's easy for politicians to keep increasing the formulas. So most of us have 401k. I mean, how are we, most people retiring? Various investments you make in stocks and real estate, Social Security, whatever, 401k or company, pension benefit you get, and you reduce, you cut back on some lifestyle things when you get older. That's what people do. I don't understand why public employees get these gilded pensions that are so far above what everybody else gets. And then the public employee unions, they say, well, the average is only, $35,000 or $38,000, something like that a year. Well, that's true, but the average goes back many years, so it goes back 30 years, and it includes people who have only worked a short amount of time, and it includes every category. You know how averages are. And anyway, it's still about 3 to 4 times what the average private sector. Now, the interesting thing was back in, was it 2011, former State Treasurer Bill Lockyer was speaking to some Northern California pension gathering, and he was talking about what he called pension envy. And and he was very close to the public employee unions. And pension envy was a lot of us at the time, a lot of people were getting pretty upset as the state had a budget crisis at the time, and that propelled the pension crisis onto the front page news. Was it like $30 billion budget deficit, even though that wasn't directly related to pensions?
It was an aggregate budget.
Yeah, but the pensions became an issue. Yep. So some cities, like San Diego, had a initiative. San Jose had an initiative to roll back pension benefits one way or the other. Anyway, that's what happened in 2011, and Lockyer had talked to the group and talked about pension envy, and he pitched the idea of we need to give something to private sector workers, and the idea that evolved out of that and others, I don't think he was the one who originally came up with it, but there was the idea that evolved. Finally, in law, it's called secure choice, and it's like the state's created a mini Social Security program, but it only gives a teeny tiny benefit to private sector workers. So my point is that the goal was a political goal, as I see it, was to reduce pension envy, stop the rest of us from being so upset about the massive pensions that public employees get. But if you go to Transparent California or the Comptroller website, you'll see the size of those pensions, and it just isn't right. And unless you get that compensation part of it under control. So anyway, we started talking about what would I do?
It, yeah.
Well, California rule, that would probably
That'd
fix
be
it
your first
right
place
there.
To start.
Yeah, 401k, switch to that. That's much more dramatic, but the California rule wouldn't mean eliminating defined benefits, but then the 401k. So we could come up with a handful of things to do, and it would work. But you can't do it. It's political. Yeah, you can't do it because it's the political problem.